Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are unpacking a seriously fascinating theory from a recent geopolitical analysis. It's all about this stunning diplomatic maneuver in the Middle East that, quite frankly, completely flips our traditional understanding of regional conflicts right on its head. It is a wild ride, so let's get into it. Okay, let's start with a massive geopolitical puzzle that the source presents. Picture this. Why on earth would the Gulf states actively step in to stop a U.S. retaliatory strike against Iran, while they are currently actively being bombed by Iran? I mean, it sounds completely counterintuitive, right? It just doesn't seem to make any sense. So, to objectively unravel this mystery, our explainer today is going to follow this exact roadmap. We'll hit a surprising geopolitical paradox, protecting economic master plans, the containment architecture, covert action meets diplomacy, and finally, we'll look at how the economic trap closes. All right, starting right off with Section 1, a surprising geopolitical paradox. Let's set the stage and look at the immediate context here. According to the analysis, after U.S. and Israeli strikes in late February, Iran retaliated by blockading the Strait of Hormuz. And then, by late March, things escalated dramatically. We're talking over 3,000 attacks launched against Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE. The UAE even saw drone activity dangerously close to its Baraka nuclear plant. And yet, moving into May of 2026, Gulf leaders make this completely unprecedented call to actually halt a planned U.S. strike on Iran. And this 20% figure brilliantly illustrates the global stakes here. That blockade literally choked off 20% of the world's seaborne oil. We are talking about the single most critical energy choke point on the planet. This disruption briefly pushed Brent crude all the way up to $95 a barrel, and it threatened to drive gas prices in the U.S. well past $5 a gallon. But here's the kicker. Despite serving essentially as target practice for Iranian projectiles for months, the source reports that 3 Gulf leaders picked up the phone. They called Donald Trump, who, by the way, was reportedly ready to resume bombing because of Iranian stall tactics, and they just asked him to stand down. They literally stepped in to save their attacker from a full-scale assault. No way, right?
So that brings us to Section 2, protecting economic master plans. Seriously, why on earth would they do this?
Well, the source makes a super compelling argument here. We've got to follow the money. Look, the Gulf states aren't doing this out of the goodness of their hearts or some sudden wave of sympathy. A full-scale regional inferno would absolutely obliterate their own massive long-term economic blueprints. What's really fascinating is how the analysis maps out the specific existential vulnerabilities for each of these nations. Let's break it down. For Saudi Arabia, Crown Prince MBS has basically bet his entire legacy on Vision 2030, which is this massive initiative to transition into a post-oil global investment hub. A regional war shutting down ports and sending missiles into Riyadh, yeah, that kills the vision and totally scares away Western investors. Then you have the UAE. Dubai is this critical transit port with robust commercial ties to Iran, plus they just signed an $8.4 billion U.S. arms deal. They just cannot afford a regional inferno. And then Qatar? Qatar actually shares the world's largest natural gas reservoir with Iran. So a destroyed Iran means they lose a massively vital energy and business partner. So the source concludes that these nations made a highly rational strategic calculation. A contained neighbor is simply better for business than a destroyed one. But they're kind of playing a brilliant game here, squeezing both sides. While they're pressing Washington for a military pause, they're simultaneously warning Iran not to exploit that pause. Basically making it crystal clear that Iran is going to desperately need their help to rebuild when the dust settles. All right, let's move right along to Section 3, the containment architecture. This is where all this diplomacy takes on a highly structured form. The analysis suggests that this Gulf intervention is actually the 2020 Abraham Accords operating at its absolute most sophisticated level yet. See, the goal was never to just bomb Iran into the Stone Age in one fell swoop. Instead, the vision is what the source calls structural deterrence. It's like building this giant puzzle of interlocking relationships, shared interests, intel, commerce, that are so deep, the threat is strategically suffocated without ever crossing into catastrophic, full-blown warfare. And this architecture relies on a really unique formula, basically an interlocking network of 3 key pillars. First, you have Israeli military and intelligence muscle. Then you combine that with Arab economic power and diplomatic cover. And finally, the whole thing is reinforced by American strategic backing and naval presence. When you put all that together, it creates a regional order designed to completely encircle Iran, making sure it can no longer threaten its neighbors, export terrorism, or enrich uranium. It's a real game changer.
Which brings us to Section 4. Covert action meets diplomacy. You guys, prepare yourselves for a pretty dramatic twist in the narrative here.
According to reports from Reuters and the New York Times that are cited by the source, there is actually a dual-track strategy at play. Get this. At the exact same moment that Saudi Arabia and the UAE were conducting public diplomacy, actively asking for a U.S. military pause to protect their economies, they were simultaneously conducting their own covert, offensive airstrikes straight into Iranian territory. I mean, wow.
As the source brilliantly puts it, the very same countries lobbying on behalf of Iran are also lobbing bombs into Iran. Hit the nail on the head right there. This stark contrast is absolutely crucial to understand. It proves that they are managing Iran, not protecting it. They are basically applying pressure precisely where they want it to hurt and then releasing it where it serves their own long-term economic and strategic interests.
And that brings us to our final section. The economic trap closes. Because, as you'll see, that pause in airstrikes definitely did not mean an escape. Even with a pause in U.S. airstrikes, the reality on the ground is just striking. Step 1. The U.S. naval blockade is holding absolutely firm. Step 2. Satellite photos reveal that Iran's main oil export terminal at Karg Island is completely paralyzed. We're talking zero loading activity. Because of that, moving to Step 3, with no ships getting in or out, their storage tanks have filled to absolute maximum capacity. And the final blow? As a result, Iran is being forced to physically shut down its oil production entirely. The whole shebang just stopped. Now, if we zoom out and look at the broader geopolitical chessboard, things look incredibly isolated for Iran right now. The source notes that Iran's traditional patrons are totally sidelined. China, well, feeling the pain of that closed strait, they're actually pivoting toward the U.S. position and demanding it reopen. Russia is bogged down in Ukraine, totally unable to provide any meaningful support. Meanwhile, joint military and intel operations between the UAE and Israel have reached totally unprecedented levels, all while the U.S. maintains this overwhelming naval blockade. Bottom line, Iran is surrounded. So the analysis concludes that those 3 phone calls to stand down, they weren't a lifeline for Iran at all. Actually, scratch that. It's more like they were the architects of the Abraham Accords, making sure this trap of methodical, multi-front strategic encirclement closes cleanly and perfectly. And it's a trap that wasn't just set in the last 2 months. It was carefully designed way back in September 2020. It leaves us with a truly provocative thought to end our explainer today. As we watch the Middle East drastically redefine its alliances, and as economic leverage paired with covert strikes starts replacing full-scale invasions, are we watching the future of sophisticated, silent warfare unfold right before our eyes? It's a lot to think about. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep asking those big questions, and I'll see you next time.